Let's look at My Heart Leaps Up by William Wordsworth. I'll read it, then we'll have a look at it. Let's actually just, let's get the draw thing right first. And then, there we go. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began, so is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. The child is father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. So we're stepping back from the novel rhythm, and sprung rhythm of the of Gerald Manley Hopkins, and this kind of more modern style of rhyming and rhythm. And here we have a pretty simple piece in terms of decoding its form. You can track it yourself. I mean, it's not necessarily a completely trivial rhyme scheme. A B C C A B C and D. So yes, you have it's nine lines. It has some features that will remind you of other forms. So though the form is not absolutely classic, it's particularly it's most obviously not a sonnet, the thing we most associate with the classic English poem form. At the same time, you have, for instance, that end rhyme. You have, it has A, B, C, blah, blah, blah going on, and then at the end it has D, D. So it's fairly easy to parse in that way. And though I think B and piety is a weak rhyme, it has pretty easy decodable rhymes. Behold, sky began, man, old, die, man, B, piety. One thing is, of course, man there is CC is actually, it's essentially a C1 and a C2. It's the same, the same word. But yeah, all pretty easy at that level. My heart leaps up when I behold. Rhythmically, metrically, is also pretty easy on the whole. There are a couple of moments, and I think again that piety at the end kind of screws around with this. But in terms of emphasis, you have everything being. These are essentially unstressed stress. The whole way through. There's a couple of exceptions, but you have a pretty simple metrical pattern as well. Not everything is quite the same. A rainbow in the sky is 6 syllables, for instance, or let me die is 4. My heart leaps up when I behold is 8. So was it when my life began, 8. So is it now I am a man, 8. But you can see, so actually even there it's mostly common. You've got your long lines are mostly 8s through the middle up to I think 10 at the end. It might be that it's 8 and then 10, bound each to each by natural piety, is 9. So you have, again, possibly one problem there at the end is that it's slightly longer. But 8's most of the way through, except on these contrast lines, which are 6 and 4. Which are the B rhymes, in fact, particularly they are the B rhymes, sky and die. So which gives you a natural kind of way that you lead into this contrast line. It shares a rhyme, and it's short, and it's point of emphasis. A rainbow in the sky, or let me die. One of the more striking claims. Apart from my heart leaps up, mostly the long lines are fairly non-emphatic. By that I mean they're not dramatic lines. Even I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety, which is a very important sentiment, we'll move on to that, is not particularly dramatic or emphatic, whereas the rainbow that he sees, that his heart is leaping to see, or this exclamation, or let me die, these are the dramatic high points. And so again, the kind of contrast line there is quite carefully constructed and framed, though without being perfectly regular. Now, what I think is interesting and striking about this one is it's easy when reading Wordsworth, and Wordsworth is one of those who it is easiest to feel like this with. You read it and think, this is a very quotidian kind of sentiment, isn't it? Haven't we all enjoyed a rainbow once upon a time? Blah. And this is partly the problem of having set the trend. You create a way of speech, and then people end up thinking you're the cliche in it rather than the originator. And Wordsworth, in so many ways, drawing on a few people, I'm thinking about people like Cooper, for instance, such an originator of so much of our natural aesthetic and so much of what post-romanticism, both modernism, but particularly postmodernism in the broad sense in poetry, kicks back against. Where you read poets intentionally uglifying, using ugly words and uglifying what we're looking at, particularly in nature. And you see this. I've talked about Ted Hughes before. I'll be talking about Seamus Heaney soon. They are both very fine poets who, at points, really depict nature beautifully, but often have this intentional uglification, which maybe draws more. We talked about him a while ago on John Clare's anxieties about nature than John Clare's passion about nature. Wordsworth, most often because of a profound belief in the way in which divinity works itself out and expresses itself through nature. Wordsworth gives this very positive view of nature, and that can maybe be antithetical to us because it's so familiar to us, and because we've also become used to its deconstruction. So we're like, well, I know the deconstruction of this. What about all the nature red in tooth and claw? Which is Shelley, is it not? So yes. Or is it Tennyson? Someone tell me in the comments. I'm not going to Google it. But I like this, and I think it has a very pure, sincere sentiment, and it leads to it's a rare poem about the idea of childlike joy. Let's think of that cognate in Jesus talking about you need to be childlike, like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. This idea of innocence being culturally precious in European culture, Western culture over time for a very long time. Exactly the kind of thing that gets deconstructed. But I think here this is quite pure and sincere sentiment about the importance of this joy, which is something that comes from the first flush of, it's a thing the child feels which the man often does not feel. And possibly if there's a moral lesson in any poetry anywhere, it might be this saying, oh, why don't you go and enjoy some rainbows? But this idea that my heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky, so was it when my life began, so is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. So I've always been like this. I felt like it when I was little, when I was a child, a baby. I feel like it now. I'm a man and I'm grown, and I want it to be the same forever. And if it's not, I want to die. If I've hit the point where I cannot enjoy anything, I should like to die better than to live. And that's a striking sentiment. This extreme boldness and firmness about the importance of this sentiment to him. And you've got to connect it. It's not simply we think, and this is this reductionistic thing for us, a kind of fairly deracinated, denatured worldview that is very, I don't mean you, the viewer, individually, but just generally culturally, is that he's talking about something which I suppose to us seems like magic or it's certainly like religion, and indeed it is religion, but this idea that he sees in nature expression of divinity. Read Tintin Abbey is the most obvious expression of that idea, but this kind of mind that's behind the setting sun, which is also in nature in some sense, not strictly pantheism, God is the world and vice versa, but something, there's some sense of deep interconnection. And he really is kind of saying how important it is, because you want that or you want to die. The child is father of the man. So this is an organic connection. It's not something where you think, oh, well, I've simply got an idea that I'd like this. But actually, this is the organic connection from who you were to what you will be. And indeed, I think there's an implication. So was it when my life began, the child is father of the man. The child, and the rhyme, the rhyme is there as well to draw those lines together. The child is father of the man makes us think, is this not perhaps universal? The child is always the father of the man. And so is it not surprising that more people don't feel joyful, leaping hearts when they see rainbows in the sky, or whatever else it might be? They smell kind of spring for the first time, that particular clean scent in the air, or they hear bumblebees, or they see beautiful flowers, or whatever it might be. Or one of my sons at the moment greatly enjoying blowing dandelions and finding dandelions and blowing the seeds. This great joy. So why is it not the case that we are all like this? Obviously, if you'd say to Wordsworth, "Do you think this is something people lose?" He might say, "Yes, I don't know. He's not here. We have his speech here to talk to and interact with." But there's this implication, I think, that yes, he speaks to us now to say, yes, this is something that we may have had, but we lose, and for him that is fatal. And this is the interesting thing at the end, a really interesting sentiment. I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. And I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. The child is father of the man. I could wish my day. Now you could say, I think here's an interesting thing: is that piety here in this, and it just about works. I'm being harsh, but I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. There's this, or piety, 2 or 3 syllables depending on your preference. 3 may make it easier actually. So let's correct that. You kind of assume it's a 2 because that's the first way you read it in that line, but perhaps 3 is easier. But you can read that natural piety thing in 2 ways. One, you can read it in a way that coheres with Tintin Abbey as well, to hear. It's a natural piety, a pious response to the rainbow in the sky. And I think that makes sense. That makes sense as a very Wordsworthian sense and impression of the world. He's saying, I worship God. I want to always worship God. And this is a particular Wordsworthian vision of God. But what's interesting is, though I think that is certainly intended, it doesn't seem like it's the only thing intended, perhaps. And I say that because of this very interesting fact that he said the child is father of a man, and the two are connected. These lines are connected. There's a semicolon, but it's not that it is simply an independent clause moving off to say, and also this, but it's connected. And I could wish my days to be, which is poetically, by the way, quite a flat line. There's no strong impression, there's no evocation. And this is interesting, but it's interesting because it fits into the fact that Wordsworth isn't always incredibly evocative. It's not necessarily in a lot of his best work. I mean, you think about the Prelude, or even plenty of Tintin Abbey, or whatever else, or his famous, say Westminster Bridge, but or other sonnets. He is not always expressing himself in incredibly rich, voluptuous language, and in general, that's not necessarily. It's something that the Romantic poets, I'm thinking particularly the first generation and a half. So we think of Burns, Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Southey. Sometimes there is a richness and an ornateness, and this kind of neo-Renaissance sense of being influenced by other cultures and other new ideas. But often, particularly for Wordsworth of all of them, but there's a bit in all of them. Blake, I feel, is an obvious one here. There's a desire to claim the naturalness of language and the naturalness of expression. The idea that you are, in poetic communication, speaking with your own voice rather than, and this is the important comparison in terms of cultural rebellion or confrontation, rather than the previous so many generations, the Augustans, often given a bad rap, and you can read G.K. Saintsbury on why that is perhaps an unfair rap. But you look at the Augustans with the sense of artificiality. They look at them and think these people are artificial, they are establishment, they render poetry an elite activity when it can be a communication to the masses and to everyone. And you see, these are men who mostly initially supported the French Revolution and largely thought better of it thereafter. Wordsworth, Coleridge and Southey all did, and virtually everyone with any sort of moral impulse, I think, did at the time, as shocking as it might seem to us who may be culturally predisposed towards it. Thomas Paine, it speaks whatever it speaks of him that he did not change his mind, but all these others, Ben Franklin did, all these others did. Basically, anyone who saw it did. I say Franklin, who do I mean? Someone can probably guess who I mean in the comments as well. But there's a cultural confrontation nonetheless with artificiality that removes art from most people. And this is a very sympathetic kind of attitude. I think we can most of us would say, yes, I want people to enjoy art. I don't want it to be a preserve of the highly educated and the absolute elite, and no one else can ever be moved or touched by it. And you see this in music. You see this with the move away from the Baroque into the classical significantly. One strong influence is the idea of the popular orchestra, the popular concert hall, the popular audience, the middle classes coming to listen, and indeed, sometimes they're even poorer people, working classes, coming to listen. This harks back in the English mind, at least, to the Globe and the fact that Shakespeare and his brilliant intellectual contemporaries wrote for popular audiences as well as elite audiences. And so Wordsworth is in that kind of, both that tradition in English, but also in that cultural movement across Europe of, why do you find J.S. Bach so crusty, and you find C.P.E. Bach or J.C. Bach, the two great influences of Mozart, if he admitted any, why do you find them so good, and why do you find Mozart so good? Well, culturally, it was not about the quality, though you can debate quality, but it's about the accessibility. And in that case, it's a movement, say, from polyphony to homophony, and various other kind of techniques to do with the way the music sounds and works. And here you've got a similar thing where the language is intentionally often fairly plain. And I don't think we suffer too much for it. I don't think we're like, oh, I've not been ravished enough. I think what it does allow is that there's this clear impulse that he wants to communicate. Anyway, back to that impulse with that tangent finished. Bound each to each by natural piety. So one, it is this rainbow in the sky. But two, because the child's father and the man, and I could wish my days to be, they're connected. And of course, the days are for the child to the man to old age and death, bound each to each by natural piety. And this both makes us think of, yes, the rainbow in the sky, but also that piety is something which Wordsworth would have understood. He will have known enough of his Latin and Aeneid to know pietas is this idea, a generational fidelity. So he's not here talking about actually being pious towards his father, but he is talking, I think, about being pious towards his child self, and that in his old age he hopes to be pious to himself. Now, there is an integrity and a continuity to what is given and natural in him. He is saying, look, this is what I'm like, and perhaps implicitly what everyone is or ought to be like, and I want to be pious and faithful to that, both in the sense I want to be pious and faithful to, this worship of nature, but also I want to be pious and faithful to a human self and a human identity. And I think the fact that he makes that about childlike joy is something which, as I say, is I think fairly rare, at least communicated so clearly and well by a major poet. Wordsworth has other examples of this, in fact, but very few other poets are really interested in I suppose expressing like this. I think I could probably scrape through the memory banks and come up with a couple of other, the idea of, and Seamus Heaney has this actually, and as I said, I'll be talking about personal helicon. But personal helicon, the idea of enjoying something in nature, but also perhaps finding it scary, I don't know. But Robert Penn Warren, who we spoke about at the start of this series, talking about his enjoyment of certain things as a child, there is stuff there are examples there. But I think it is something distilled down here very well, that it is integral to Wordsworth, integral perhaps to all humans. And I enjoy that about it. I think it is clearly put. And yes, I wonder what you think. It's obviously quite different to a lot of what we've read in this series. So I'd love to hear what you think about that side of it. And if you can think of other examples of the same kind of poem. Anyway, I will see you next time.